today as we gather at the McGlone Academy Confluence Center. We are here with Mr. Paul Clifton. Thank you so much for hosting us and for setting this up. This event would not have been possible additionally with the collaborative efforts of the I want to say this in alphabetical order because everybody collaborated. So it's Children's Farms in Action, Counterpath, East Colfax Community Collective, East Colfax Neighborhood Association, Montbello 2020, Montbello Organizing Committee, and Northeast Park Hill Coalition. Together, we have come together to create a platform where the voices of our communities can be heard and where our future leaders can engage in meaningful discussions that will shape our council district. Tonight, we have planned a moderated forum where the District 8 candidates will address the pressing issues that affect us all. It is crucial that we pay close attention as these discussions will shed light on their perspectives, values, and visions for our communities. But this event is not just about the candidates and their viewpoints, it's also about us, the people. It is about our concerns, it's about our hopes and aspirations for District 8. That is why we have set aside a dedicated time for a 20-minute Q&A session where each of you will have the chance to ask relevant questions and engage directly with the candidate. I encourage you all to make the most of this opportunity, whether you're here in person or whether you're online. Feel free to ask questions that reflect the needs and interests of your families and your community. Your voices matter, and tonight we aim to ensure that they are heard. If you're just arriving, we have interpreters here for our Spanish, Amharic, Burmese, and Karen speakers. Once again, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizing partners that have come together to make this event possible. Your dedication to our community is truly inspiring. Thank you for our candidates, and thank you for our community for joining us tonight. Together, let's make this Unified District 8 Candidate Forum an insightful, engaging, and impactful event for all. Thank you. And with that, we'll go live on social media.
Good evening. How are you guys doing tonight? My name is Lamone Knowles, and I am with the Northeast Park Hill Coalition. Today, we will have a very deep conversation on how you as candidates will be champions to stop displacement that we are seeing in our communities. We will begin with opening questions on different topics that are important to our communities. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. Following the initial answers, each candidate will have the opportunity to issue a rebuttal comment and ask questions of each other. We will then open up the floor to follow-ups from the moderator or questions from the audience on these topics. At the end of the forum, we will have a lightning round of 30 minutes where we will ask you yes or no questions. Please raise your hand if you are a yes, or keep your hand down if you are a no. Depending on the question, if it's a no, we're in trouble, right? Please remember to speak slow for the interpreters. The interpreters will have signs that say slow down if anyone is speaking too fast. I would like now to open up with our first topic, displacement of local businesses.
Hello, my name is Chi-Chi. I'm a local business owner here in the East Colfax neighborhood. Right now, business owners are given their property tax bills and asked to pay in a very short period of time. This puts a humongous burden on business owners as we are seeing taxes double year to year. What ideas do you have on ways that we can alleviate this tax burden for small business owners?
Each candidate has 2 minutes to respond.
Okay. So I think first and foremost, I think small businesses are really the lifeblood of District 8. And I know Chi-Chi, as a small business owner, you care deeply about this too. But we get a little feedback here. I think what I would want to do is figure out how we could work with the city from a, a tax perspective and from the Department of Economic Development and Opportunity, and also with Peak Academy to think through that process. Because what you described, sort of, you get your tax bill and you have a relatively short amount of time to pay. That's got to be really deeply upsetting and surprising sometimes if the bill is more than you expected or you're used to getting. So I think what I would want to do is figure out how do we facilitate, both in this specific process and in others, how are we regularly having conversations between small business owners in District 8 and our city to say, here's what we're experiencing, here's what's going on. And then how can we facilitate maybe changes, whether it's changing the process or figuring out what kind of, especially from a anti-displacement lens, what kind of property tax relief programs could we work with?
Can you all hear me? No? How about now? Yeah. Hi. Chantel Lewis, candidate for Denver City Council's District 8. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you all for your attendance here this evening. I think there's an opportunity. So one of the things that was recently put in place at the City and County of Denver was $15 million that was invested into a venture fund that would provide access to small business owners, particularly Black and Brown business owners, dollars that would be invested, but also support in terms of infrastructure. And so I think really expanding the amount of dollars that we are investing in that way, I think there also might be an opportunity for us to explore what it might look like to have a tiered approach to how taxes are assessed based on the revenue that you're generating as a business, so that there's maybe a more level playing field for small business owners that have those smaller revenues. In addition to that, I think there could be an opportunity for us as City and County of Denver to think about where the opportunities to incentivize small business owners so that you all are able to sustain. And is there an opportunity, as we're looking at when those taxes are due, instead of this lump sum, is there an opportunity for us to have payments that you all might be able to make, as opposed to this huge burden that comes out of nowhere that your business hasn't had the opportunity to anticipate? And then I also would welcome small businesses to reach out if they have some ideas that they'd like to share with the campaign. I'd be happy to learn those.
So, do you have any rebuttal questions for each other? Okay. So Chantel, you mentioned a payment plan. Is this something that you would have to get support from other council members?
Imagine so. I think there's an opportunity for us to explore it, right? What that could potentially look like from a tiered approach. Absolutely. Well, let's not talk about gaining support for that issue, and because I think the starting place for that conversation is exploration, maybe to see what other cities might be doing, and also what we can do from a compliance and legality standpoint. So I don't want to make any promises that we can't actually effectuate. But I think the opportunity on council is to build relationships with individuals so that you can figure out where the opportunities for alignment. I found that during my time on the RTD board, we were often representing our constituencies, and thus because we are representing our constituencies, we are coming at issues from different lenses. But if you and I are able to have a conversation one-on-one to say, okay, Lamone, what's important to you? Let me tell you what's important to my communities, and then we can find that messy middle where we might be able to find some agreement. And so that's typically my approach. I tend to ask two questions. If you heard me speak, you've heard me say this: who stands to be burdened and who stands to benefit? Because those are important questions for me. And then a follow-up is, how might I be wrong? And I think those are powerful questions when you're building relationships with folks to be able to find some agreement on policy moving forward.
That's true. So Brad, in District 8, you've got a mixture of communities: Northeast Park Hill, historical Black community; Montbello, a second historical Black community; East Colfax, a very diverse immigrant community, as well as a historical community. And then you've got Central Park, which is the newest community on the block. Okay, so in terms of businesses, it looks like the Central Park businesses are doing okay, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say what I've seen in sort of Central Park from a business perspective is they have, there's a lot of chains a lot of kind of large corporations, and they have, you know, I mean, everybody's experienced this all over the city, but there's also a lot of small businesses that maybe operate out of their homes or other things like that. But yeah, I think, you know, in general, I think it's a fair statement to say they're doing okay.
All right. So then we just got to catch up the other neighborhoods in District 8. We've always had small businesses in District 8 that have been divested for whatever reason. We want to catch them up. So property taxes on businesses is a big problem. So I just wanted to hear from you. How would you go about coordinating something for those businesses?
Yeah, I think anything we can do to, you know, I think whether you're, you know, in a residential or commercial setting, you know, anytime you are paying rent to a landlord, you are at risk of you know, change and displacement and economic hardship. And so I think a couple of things that, you know, the city could do and what my District 8 office could do is first, I think, promote the use of more commercial land trusts. I like the idea of the city using funds to help empower maybe community organizations. And we've seen examples of this in other parts of District 8 where they purchase commercial properties and then allow sort of local businesses that are getting started in each neighborhood the opportunity to have, you know, more affordable commercial space, which is so hard to find, you know, not only in District 8, but across the city. And then I think second is to think about, you know, within DDO, within sort of the Nest division and department, you know, are there additional things besides grants that could be really focused on anti-displacement from a property tax perspective? And again, maybe you could sort of determine it based on, you know, your annual revenues or anything like that, that might sort of right size it. But.
So do we have any questions from the audience concerning property taxes for businesses? No? Okay. How many of you own businesses? Do you have any concerns about property taxes in your businesses? Nick?
No, I'm just saying some of us don't own our properties, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, we're renters and we're leasing our space. So it's hard to really get a dial in on what our concern as far as the property tax unless it's affecting our rent.
Right.
I would imagine
Yeah, it is affecting our rent.
that owners probably carry those expenses to those that are paying those rents. And so I would imagine that most folks in here do have an interest in probably owning their own businesses. I think what we saw in 5 Points with businesses like the Welton Street Cafe, for example, is that they didn't own the property that they were in for many, many years to the benefit of community. And so I think the city has a responsibility for some of these long-term businesses to figure out where the opportunities to get them into ownership, whether that be an incentive, down payment assistance, grants, what that could potentially look like, or the opportunity to expand the program that I mentioned earlier with that venture fund that's investing those dollars directly into those businesses and helping those businesses to scale as well.
Okay.
One just thing I'll add is, you know, not to bring up this subject, but you know, from the Park Hill Golf Course, one of the concepts that was in that community benefits agreement was a property tax anti-displacement fund,
Correct.
especially where it was close to where new development might be happening. And I think that's a concept that could be interesting to kind of look into and see if that could be helpful from a commercial setting, you know, in the context of District 8.
I agree. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna move on to the next question. This is about residential property taxes. You have 2 minutes to answer after I read the question to you. Homeowners who are working families, moderate or low income, are facing a huge property tax increase, as stated in recent news reports. Long-term residents, especially senior citizens, will be at risk of losing their homes and becoming homeless if they can't afford to pay their property taxes next year. As our city council representative, how will you protect our residents from property tax displacement? Chantel?
You want me to start? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's my understanding from the city level is that you can actually defer those property taxes to point of sale. And so I think that's an opportunity that folks have access to currently. That's not a long-term solution. Actually, it's one that I'm uncomfortable with, to be completely honest with you, because you're deferring those property taxes to point of sale. But I do think that we should be working with our both state and federal folks to see if there's opportunities to incentivize those opportunities to provide rebates in some way for folks. I do know that you can contest those property taxes as well, and that might be one way collectively for folks to be able to combat that. And then finally, I think from a city lens, we might be able to, while we might not be able to increase income, that we might be able to lower expenses. And so one of the things that I've heard thus far from folks within the community is around trash, recycle, and compost. And those dollars no longer coming out of the general fund, but folks needing to pay for those services instead. And so when I talk about a reduction in expenses, going back to the previous model where the city was responsible for that dollar amount and it wasn't to the burden of communities, is an opportunity for us. And I think we can do more of that in terms of the reduction of expenses for particularly our seniors that are in their homes.
So when you say using these utility fees for composting, recycling, isn't that just shifting the burden from one bucket to another?
It's shifting the burden back onto the city. So that's how the city had been previously funded, or that program had been previously funded, that it wasn't the responsibility of the residents. And so when I talk about reducing expenses, it's because I have an understanding, particularly for our senior citizens, that it might not be possible to increase income. And so what are the angles that we might be able to look at as a city to reduce expenses for more folks within our city, as opposed to having that burden go to folks who weren't expecting it, quite frankly.
Right. So Brad, what do you say?
Well, so the city does have a property tax relief program. The name of it and some of the details are escaping me at the moment, but I know we do have one that can provide some relief. So trying to shore that up and maybe strengthen it could be something to look into. As Chantel mentioned, you can challenge your assessment. It's my understanding that you have to pay to challenge it. So I think if that's correct, then I think we could potentially waive that fee for seniors and other people at risk of displacement. And then I think a lot of this is trying to work with colleagues at the state level. And there's a ballot measure that's going to go out this fall that's going to hopefully provide some property tax relief as well. But I think continuing to work with folks, because I think everybody's reeling if you own your home from that property tax assessment everybody got a few weeks ago.
Okay. So do you all have any questions for each other
Oh, yeah, I absolutely have
on
a
this
question.
topic?
Oh, no.
No? So you're in agreement?
I just don't have a follow-up question. It doesn't mean I agree.
All right. Does anyone from the audience have a follow-up question about property taxes?
You have two behind you.
Okay, so how long is it gonna take it, with my property taxes, if I contest it? How long is that gonna take when you already gave me a foreclosure notice? How is that gonna help me?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know the exact process or how long it takes. So I'm not sure.
So the question was about property taxes and foreclosure?
Yeah, so you're saying you can contest it. If I contest it, who am I contesting it to? And how long is the process gonna take? You're talking about, recycle and the trash. You forgot that you charge the people that's sitting there every quarterly waste management as well.
Yeah, so you contest with the county. I think that was Chantel who was talking about the trash and recycling and compost program.
I'm happy to address it. Would you like me to?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So
Question is, how long is it gonna take for me to contest this property tax? And who do I contest it to?
Oh, so I actually was addressing the second part of your question. That question actually should be directed to Brad.
Well, can you answer it?
No, that was a part of Brad's speaking points. I don't want to speak for him.
Well, how about, what do you think about it?
Yeah, what do you,
What do I think about the property tax? What the
Yes.
process is?
Addressing her question, yes.
Yeah. So there's I just got an email recently in my email. There is a workshop coming up, and I'm happy to look at it on my phone on someone who's willing to take communities through the step-by-step process on how to contest that. If you give me like 2 seconds, I can tell you the time, date, and the location and how that works. This is the first time that I've ever had to, as a owner of a property, contest my property taxes. And so I don't actually know how that works, which is why I'm going to the workshop to learn alongside of folks. So if you give me a few seconds, I'll tell you where that is.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
My question is, initially, everyone always has an answer to something. Sounds good, sounds real good. But initially, if someone's in a situation where they need help, is there any way that somebody could fight for us to get preempted information, wraparound stuff, so we don't have to get to that point? Because everything sounds good when you say an A plus 1 plus 1 is 2, but we need help with number 3.
Let me give you the answer to the first question, if that's all right, to go back to that. So the Greater Park Hill UMC rep, their social justice folks are putting together a property tax appeal workshop. And that workshop is going to be taking place on, shucks, I don't know if I see the date in here. Tuesday, May 30th at 5:30. And that location is going to be 5209 East Montview Boulevard. And that's in Denver. Well, that's, yeah.
We have one more question over here.
Good evening. Property taxes are kind of curious thing. We as homeowners, in most cases, have done nothing at all to our property, and yet the amount of taxes we have to pay go up. And that's based on a formula, a fixed formula that's been set.
Mhm.
So why not look at that? Take a look at how property taxes are calculated when the majority of the folks who are experiencing these higher taxes haven't done anything to say, well, you need to raise my property because I've done things to my property to make it go up where they've done nothing at all.
Sure.
So that's a good place I think to start.
Mhm.
Take a look at how property taxes are calculated.
Thanks, Larry. I agree.
Good point.
Okay, you agree with that, Brad?
Yeah.
Okay. All righty.
You see me, Lamont? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Just
hear
make
you.
sure. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So now the next section is about fees, and Ms. Ann White is going to lead that discussion.
All right. Okay. We are concerned about the fees associated with trash pickup. Our user fees are regressive taxes. How do we make balance sheets available for transparency on where this money goes? A lot of us don't know because we already are property owners. Your property taxes, you're paying for trash. And to me, that's taxation without representation because you're being double taxed. So where are those fees going that we're paying for trash collection now?
Understanding is that those dollars are going back into the general fund because that's where those dollars were coming from originally before the burden was pushed on to communities for that trash collection. That's what I was referencing earlier, I think, when someone in the audience asked about it, is that they're going to the general fund. And so when I spoke about decreasing expenses for individuals and for households, that's what I was referencing. Is that as an example, is that instead of that burden being placed on communities and individuals, particularly our seniors, that you can then shift that back to the city being responsible for that and that's an opportunity to reduce your expenses. It's not a lot, but I think it's a start. And if we start thinking in that way on where we might be able to provide some room for our individuals in terms of their budgets by reducing expenses, I think we're on our way to being able to help folks in the very long term to stay sustainable in their homes.
Yeah, so I think with this program in particular, I think if we could, sort of go back in time, I would have rather just seen compost be made free and included in the general fund, but we're not there right now. What I would say though is I think if there's a concern about sort of the finances and where these fees are going and all that kind of stuff, those are all things that can be requested under an Open Records Act. And I think that's also something that, in my office, that's something, if that's of interest to you, Ms. Ann, or to RNOs, or just in general, anybody, is we could request someone from the city to give an update and a presentation on where do those dollars go, how's it going so far, and also just facilitate just feedback, to DOTI and to Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, to just sort of understand where's this all going, how's it going so far, because I know I get a lot of questions about this on the trail. So,
and as it relates to our seniors, I know they have a rebate program. However, the way the financial status is set as fees, it leaves a lot of seniors out, those on fixed incomes. They can't meet those guidelines. They're either, they make $1 or $2 too much, and they don't qualify for those rebate programs. If you were a council person in District 8, how would you work to fix that situation?
I think that's where the opportunity to think about what it looks like to have a tiered approach in terms of that income and those income requirements and restrictions, but also maybe there's an opportunity for us to explore what longevity in these communities have looked like, and that could potentially be a criteria that we are utilizing to get folks access to that program. But I would really say, let's look at the criteria. Let's see if the criteria is actually meeting the needs of the communities and actually answering the question or the problem that we're trying to solve. And if it's not, could we explore what a tiered approach could potentially look like? And could we explore what it looks like to keep folks in their homes long term?
Yeah, so I've talked about this a little bit in previous forums, but I really think in general, we need sort of a holistic review of all these fees that have sort of been implemented, not only as sort of the property tax increase that's going to come next year, the trash fee, the sidewalk fee, all these things. I think we need to really make sure we have a review and see what kind of burden is that placing on sort of populations like you just described, and make sure that, there's maybe different avenues where we can get some people some relief. Because I think we can't just keep adding sales tax and fees and other things to pay for special programs. I think we've got to figure out how to make this all work more within the general fund.
Are there any questions from the audience? Don't see.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions about the general fund. Some of the projects that the city does, for example, the ditch in City Park Golf was put into an enterprise fund. The enterprise funds, though, we don't know how much money is in it because money is being collected all the time. But we don't have full disclosure of what they're doing with the money. And in this case, with our property taxes going up and God knows what else is going to go up, what can you do as counselors assure that there's full transparency on the monies that we're paying out of our pockets into these funds, these enterprise funds or the general fund? Because I've never seen an accounting or balance sheet from the city. And if there is one, I haven't seen it.
Hmm.
But because we're being charged fees, we need to know where this money is going.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I think about and the opportunities I think that we have and the city has seen this is in terms of participatory budgeting. And so not only the opportunity for communities to just determine what our budget priorities could potentially look like, but it also provides us the opportunity for that transparency that you're talking about. There are a myriad of folks who can provide those services to the city and county of Denver to partner with communities to figure out what those budget priorities are, and also to provide that budget transparency so that we know where not just those dollars are going, but where all the tax dollars are going.
When you describe, about the enterprise funds, I think this is a job for the auditor.
It's the job for you counselors to communicate us to your constituents.
Yeah, and I appreciate that.
We don't go to auditors' meetings. They're not even open to the public.
So what I was getting to saying was that I was recently at an RNO meeting in the district, and the auditor showed up, and in partnership with the RNO, sort of gave an update on kind of different projects they were pursuing. But what I was trying to say is, I think like this is a job for our city council office to partner with the auditor and see if there can be some transparency and just explanation of what's going on. And then obviously go around and present it to different parts of the community, and whether it's an RNO meeting or a different group, I think that's something that could be done.
Okay, all righty. Is there any questions from the audience? Y'all are awfully quiet. I know it's hot in here, but come on.
Not the easiest way to get things, but all of that's the archived video of these things are open to the public.
Do they put out agendas?
They do. The auditor's office has a newsletter, and I'm happy to talk with you after.
Yes, please.
About it, but it is public.
Yeah, okay.
And so the comment from the audience is that the auditor's meetings are available online via Channel 8. Can you repeat the date and time, please?
I'd have to look it up.
Oh. We'll post it in the comments, but the microphone is mostly for the people online because they can't hear the audience. If you want to speak up, please come get the microphone. We're on the right-hand side. Thank you. No worries.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to a food justice question. Kiara Jackson.
All right. I asked a question last time about food access, but I want to dig a little bit deeper and connect it with some additional issues, some bigger issues as well. But given the pressing issue of climate change and its impact on food production, as well as food access, what specific policies or initiatives do you propose to address the challenges of ensuring sustainable and equitable food systems in our community?
What a great question. Yeah, no, I actually really love that question. I think about, this is so big picture, and so y'all just go with me in this vision, but I think about the opportunity for us to have community farms, the opportunity for us to have greenhouses in our community where we're not only teaching folks to grow their own food, but we're also providing jobs within communities in terms of food growers. I think about Beverly, who does the growing of food with our youth as a form of employment and teaching them how to self-sustain. I could see us like reutilizing our rooftops in our communities, not just for solar panels, but like, could those be greenhouse spaces that we could have in our communities where we're teaching folks that? And could the things that we are growing be the opportunity for us to open up a grocery store, right? We had a lot of conversation in Park Hill about a grocery store. How cool would it be for us to be growing our own things and providing food and feeding our communities affordable, nutritious food that we've grown that has also provided families the opportunity to pay their bills as well because they're employed in that way. So I think there's a lot that we can be doing in terms of attaching food access, food justice to climate as well. And I'm excited about like what that opportunity could look like.
Thank you for the question. So I think in my office, I want to make sure we're strong advocates, for community organizations that are addressing these issues, which you know very well. What Montbello Organizing Committee has been able to do with the Fresh Low Project, for example, to bring a community grocer to the neighborhood, like I think that's fantastic, and that's a lesson that I think we should be exporting to other parts of the city too. And I think what is being done here in Montbello around sort of community gardens, school gardens, and actually creating a sustainable way to pay people to manage those, and then figure out taking the sort of the harvests of those farms and then using it for food banks and other systems. Like I think that's all great. And I think the way I'd sort of sum this up is just I think the city has a responsibility, and our office is to really kind of continue supporting and working with those organizations that are really on the front lines of trying to figure this out, where there's been so much disinvestment from traditional grocery stores.
How does the intersection of climate change work with that? I wasn't sure about that piece.
So I think just in general, from sort of tackling climate change inside the city, whether that's just making sure, just in general, we're reducing emissions and all things like that. But one of the things I think about a lot is, we have a lot of empty parking lots. And those turned into sort of heat islands. And I would love to just see us try to find better uses for those things. Like again, the Fresh Low Project took an empty RTD park and ride spot and has found a better use for it. That's going to be an amazing project. That's going to provide housing, food access, all those things. But I think we've got to figure out how to reduce the heat island effect and find better uses for land that could support, food justice and figuring out ways how to do that.
Chantel, do you have anything to follow up?
One thing that I will say, and I think, and I've talked about this in the context of housing too, when we talk about community housing, is we often are proposing programs that are concentrated in poverty, but we also are often proposing programs that are keeping communities, particularly communities of color and poor communities, in the same situations in which they are today, in 10 years and in 20 years. And so when I hear food banks, like I think that's a great short-term goal, but that should not be what you should be expecting, or nor should what your city councilor be delivering when it comes to sustainable policies. Like we have a responsibility to invest in the people within this community, and the opportunity is for them to build long-term wealth and to not rely on programs like food banks, to not rely on programs like low-income housing, to not rely on affordable transportation, right? Like these discounted bus passes. You all deserve better than that. And I think politics and policies to this date have only delivered that, where we are keeping communities in poverty, and we're concentrating that poverty, and we're giving them these crumbs when you all deserve the entire pie. And so do not sell yourself short in that.
So how does the increasing cost of living fit into that plan, Chantel?
And to increase,
To what you just described, that the community deserves more than vouchers and food banks, and okay, a lot of them are using those systems because they don't have enough money.
I understand that.
So the cost of living, in Denver Metro, let alone the state, makes it impossible for a lot of our community members to make the right kind of money to where they don't need those systems. So how would that fit into what you just mentioned earlier?
It's all connected, right, Lamone? And when you come from community, you understand community. But when you also lived it, you understand what are the opportunities to create policies to get folks out of it. There's no judgment in the short term. I've talked about, and Brad has also over the weekend, so we can have a conversation about that as well. I've talked about my reliance on food stamps, public assistance, affordable housing. I'm not ashamed of any of those things. Those things were intentionally designed to invest in communities to get them out. What I'm saying is that's not a long-term solution. So when we talk about affordability, when we talk about sustainability, I would really like for us to stop treating Black, brown, and poor people as projects, as social projects, as though they can't actually earn the incomes to be able to self-sustain instead of relying on these programs in the long term. So that's what I'm talking about. And we can do that. We can look at the social determinants of health and track folks when we're putting them in housing, right? We can make sure they have access to the mental health supports that they need, to make sure they have access to nutrition, to make sure they have access to reliable, affordable transportation. But I'm talking about in terms of long-term sustainability. I want to see communities thrive, not simply surviving.
Correct.
And I would argue that there are a lot of folks currently, not just in Montbello, but in the city, that are simply surviving at best. And that's not what I want for our city. That's not the vision that I have.
I understand. Do you see city council playing a role in that
Absolutely.
improvement?
Absolutely.
What about you, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I think cost of living is the number one issue I hear out on the trail. And it's not only just making things more affordable, but it's also helping people, you know, if they're able to, and one like is to find things like apprenticeships, job training, other things like that to help people make more money too. And I think, again, there's a lot of organizations in this room that have been involved in things like entrepreneurship and micro business support and helping launch businesses. And I think that's an important part of the equation that's not always talked about is we need to help people, you know, and make sure we're partnering with community to figure out how do we grow our sort of the community ownership and individual ownership and things like that inside our city.
Do you see this model of community, for example, community farming, like the Fresh Low Project? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to need someone to monitor the microphone back there because it's hard for me. Back and forth. Yeah. Okay. And I forgot my train of thought. Community farming. That's correct. I saw a couple of summers ago where the city wanted to charge a homeowner who was growing vegetables and selling them for a license. I don't recall how much it was, but what I see happening is if I have a huge backyard and I'm growing all kind of green vegetables and I've got to run on sales, how am I going to be able to keep the majority of that money and not be taxed out of it or feed out of it?
So I am not an expert on this, but I think, you know, there's things like the Cottage Act, and there's probably some federal and state laws that interplay with this, which it shouldn't be. Like, if it's as simple as you're growing food and you want to serve your community, I don't think we should be getting in the way of that. But I also don't want to, you know, speak out of turn and if there's some sort of regulation or anything like that. But I do think, you know, we should be supporting local food entrepreneurs, you know, that want to help and serve their community. You know, so I'll leave it at that. But I don't think, you know, we should be putting too many roadblocks into sort of helping feed communities.
That helps communities thrive when they can become entrepreneurs and do some wonderful things. So Chantel, how do you feel about that?
I support it. My son's here, and he and I garden. I love gardens. And not only do I love gardening, I love feeding the community when I garden. I haven't done that during this election, obviously, because I'm a little busy. But I think it's a great opportunity to not only to feed your communities, but to build community, right? Like, we're not designed to be individuals, although society will teach you that that's how you win. It's like you get yours and you don't worry about anyone else's. But the opportunity is really for us to be communal, to take care of each other. And we saw threads of that during the pandemic where folks were like, hey, I'm getting this rebate. I don't need it. I'll give it to you. Or, hey, I have this extra food. I don't need it. I'm giving it to you. That's how our cities should be operating, that we're taking care and looking out for one another.
Yeah, we have a really nice community farm at Dahlia Square, and they grow year round. They have their outdoor gardens as well as what's in the greenhouse. And they do, they either sell at an affordable rate or they give away. Do you foresee or support more of those type of opportunities throughout the district?
Yes. because I live a block away from it, and I take my little wagon when Bev opens up her farmer's market, and that's where I get my stuff from during the summer. So from a selfish reason, absolutely so. But I also think that communities should have access to that and take their wagons to go get the discounted organic groceries that are grown by folks in our community with love.
Very good. Okay, is there any questions from the audience?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I have a question regarding budgeting and funding these visions for community food access solutions. So in Montbello, we have created a model. You've talked about it, where we partner with community organizations that garden, teach people about gardening, teach people about healthy food and healthy eating habits. Some of our partners also operate food banks. Some of them operate on the daily. Some of them operate every first and third Thursday of the month. And right now, we've recently, I don't know if I'm able to share this, but we were not awarded a city grant that is significant and impacts all of our partners and has an impact of hurting, our families in Montbello. And instead, organizations from outside of this neighborhood were awarded the funds to come serve us. And so as our city council members, how can you step up, or as the city council member, what can you do to ensure that when funding is allocated for specific geographies, that it is the partners within those geographies that are not only serving the community, but that are benefiting from the city funding? Because right now we are losing food, we are losing services, we are losing education, and we're also seeing increase in demand. We haven't touched on this, but the city and county of Denver sees between 150 and 400 migrants daily. Montbello is receiving a huge portion of that, and they're coming to our food pantries. And right now we are at fear of what's going to happen to these individuals who are now dependent on our services to get food because they can't work. They don't have money. So what's going to happen to them? But just to take it back, the question is about budgeting. It's about dedicating funding for this vision and making sure that the community that the grantees that receive the money are the grantees that are working in the community to make sure that our people are being served.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general principle, that should be how it works. And I've heard a little bit about the situation that you're describing, Myra, and it's unfortunate. As someone who's worked in nonprofits, it's really upsetting when you're expecting a large grant and you sort of find out on very short notice that you're not going to get it. So I think in general, I would love to see the city, when it's doing their grant making process in any part, is that if it's for a substantial amount of money and they've gotten in the past, we gotta make sure there's plenty of notice if things are going to change. But obviously, I think as a general principle, I think organizations that live and serve in the community should be the ones who are getting the grant funding to do that work. So,
Yes, ma'am.
It's a given for me. I think that wouldn't have happened under my watch. So, and I'll give you an example. What I learned on the RTD board is that there are negotiables and there are non-negotiables for me. And when things are harmful to community and have long-term and short-term impacts negatively to communities, that's a hill that I'm absolutely willing to die on. And so when COVID came around and our operators were required to risk their lives for their livelihoods, I was standing up by myself on that RTD board to make sure they had access to PPE, to make sure they had access to testing, to make sure they had access to inoculations, and I pushed for rear door boarding for months, even though I was pushed back on and stood by myself amongst 15 other colleagues who were like, Chantel, let it go, stop it. When you're in community, you know the impacts to losing a grant to that magnitude and the number of families that's going to impact and the people who are not going to be fed. That's not happening. That is absolutely not happening, because I believe our communities deserve better and no one should not have access to food. Like that's just basic. That's not even policy. That's just basic humanitarian, that folks have that access. And so we should be looking at the process on how that grant was awarded and for what reasons that grant was not awarded to those that are closest to this work and closest to the community that understands the community.
Oh, I understand. So the grant process for small business has been very difficult for Black and Brown communities and women-led businesses to qualify for grants and opportunities, like, for example, at the airport, getting contracts to do commercial construction work or any major need for on a lucrative contract. So how would you right that wrong?
So one thing I want to be is a champion for small business in District 8. And I think for the businesses that you just described, one thing I would like to do is just on a regular basis, you know, have businesses talking with the city about how difficult it is to access some of those, whether it's a grant or a contract or something at the airport. I mean, the airport is one of our main economic engines of our city. And I think it's still one of those amazing areas where we could do a lot of good and lift up a lot of businesses in District 8 that don't normally get those kind of opportunities. So I'd like to facilitate a lot of more conversations between the two and say, hey, here's what we're experiencing. Here's what we'd like to do. How can we fix this in the future? And hopefully that informs either some changes inside the city or it informs some policy ideas that we could run through city council.
Okay, Chantel.
So when we talk about righting wrongs, I must take the opportunity to talk about a mailer that was sent out this weekend that was sent on behalf of Brad's camp. Lewis pled guilty to theft in 2008 for stealing money from people's benefit accounts while she worked at Denver Human Services. 2008 is when this happened. And so when we talk about righting wrongs, I'm going to push back a little bit on Brad here to say there's actually never any righting of wrongs when we're talking about something that happened in 2008 and 2023. Now back to having a conversation about community. If that is the lens that Brad is going to be operating from, then how do we know that he's actually going to atone for the wrongs that have been pushed upon Black and brown folks and communities of color in this community for the wrongs that they've had to endure at the hands of the city? I don't trust that to be true, to be completely honest with you. But I do think we can have conversations with communities, Black and brown ones who've tried to access these programs to figure out what the barriers are to that access. I also think we need to go deeper and not as wide. And so when I talk about being deep, those grants are $15,000. And I would imagine, Chi-Chi, as a small business owner, that that's maybe a lot of money and not enough all at the same time. And so we really need to think about what's the policies that we put in place so that we're going deeper in our investment for folks.
I need to address that.
Yeah.
So there was an independent expenditure mailer that was sent out that I am not associated with, that I condemn, that I had nothing to do with. And as soon as a neighbor showed it to me, I called Chantel and told her, this was not me, I condemn it. That's not kind of the way I've conducted myself on this campaign. I'm actually been really proud that our race has been a positive one about the issues. And negative campaigning like that has no place here. And I condemn it wholeheartely.
Did you take money from them?
I don't know who wrote it. I don't know who did it.
It's on the literature. So when we talk about leadership has to be accountable for the mistakes that they've made, own those, recognize the impact, and not talk about the intent in our communities. And so as a city councilor, there are people who are going to be working on your benefit, on your behalf. And we have a responsibility as city councilors to say, hey, this is what's acceptable within my campaign and within my campaign office and for my communities. And this is what's not acceptable within my campaign and within my campaign office and my communities. And I've done that. And you've seen that not just in my campaign, you've seen that in how I lead at the Regional Transportation District. And so I apologize, Bob, but that is insufficient.
Well, yeah. So let me be clear. I don't know who was behind that. I condemn it. It was reprehensible. And by law, you can't coordinate or work with anyone. So and guess what? I just have no idea who did it. So I condemn it. Chantel, and I will just say, I apologize that happened, but I had nothing to do with it.
Your apology has to be as loud as your disrespect. And so to condemn it it looks like for you to send out something similar? That's what I thought. Okay.
Well,
Oh, I didn't send it
in
out.
the mayor's race, a similar negative ad has been going out against Johnston by a PAC that supports Kelly Brough. All of the races have been clean. No dirty campaigning, but these PACs and these IEPs are problematic. And like just what we just saw between the two of you up here, you said you had nothing to do with that. You don't know who did it, but something has to be done with these IEPs and these PACs who want to dirty up these races. So I'm hoping that we won't see any more of those. We got 2 weeks left.
You know, I ain't fighting dirty. That's not how
Okay.
I fight. I lead from a space of love.
And in our district, we have some great concerns about being shoved out of this community.
Sure.
So just kind of stay focused on that. And the IEPs and the PACs will have to be dealt with at a different time. Okay. Sorry about that, Chantel.
No, I'm a tough
You
cookie.
didn't
You know
deserve
that.
that. Yeah. All right. Any questions from the audience?
The question would be, since we're all in agreement of the PACs and how they operate, what policies or initiatives would you put forward sitting on council to have more transparency from these groups?
Can you? Okay, perfect. So the question from the audience was, if we're in agreement about the PACs and how they operate, what are some policies that you as council members can do to increase the transparency of these PACs?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what I would do is want to consult with some election law officials and think about what you could do to increase that transparency and get it out of this, because I don't think it's helpful. And again, I want this campaign and I want every race and for city council, for the mayor and everywhere on down to be clean and about the issues. So, you know, whatever an expert can tell us we can do, let's do it to prevent these harms from happening in the future.
And I think just on its face, I think transparency, if you look at the website, you can see the name, but there's usually not anything attached to it. So like these, you can operate and be anonymous. I think folks should put their names, addresses, right? Like, so that you cannot hide behind this anonymous, we love Denver, nomenclature, if you will, but it's very specifically, this is the individual, this is where they live, this is, the work that they do. So there's transparency. When we collect donations, that's the information we have to get from individual donors, right? I know where you work. I know your first and last name. I know your address. Sometimes you give me your email address and phone number. And I think that kind of transparency should be on the same side.
Great. Yeah. So the questions that we're asking you tonight, hopefully you're making a note of them.
Yeah.
Is possible policy action, or at least engagement with the community, because we're out here in the trenches and we feel and see what does and doesn't work a lot of times before our elected officials do.
Sure.
So how are you going to engage with the community? I know you're going to be busy once you're elected. How are you going to engage with the community on a regular basis so you know what's happening and what's going on?
Yeah. If I'm busy, it should be with community. I've talked about co-governance, and if I'm honest to that, and my promise to community is that I am going to be co-governing, and that's what I'm going to be busy with, is working in tandem with each of you to come up with the policies that are going to be best beneficial for all of you, right? I should not be operating in a vacuum as an individual council person, but working with the grassroots right? So that we're creating policies that's bottom up and not top down. That's one way. One of the questions that I've asked any of the community groups that I've had the opportunity to meet with thus far is, okay, tell me how you actually want me to engage with you. Like, when do I call you? Do I call you when the policy is created? Do you want to sit at the table with me and co-create that? Do you just want to take a quick look at it? Are you more of like being a part of the larger conversation. And so that question also goes back to each of you. How do you want me to engage with you? What does engagement actually look like that's going to be beneficial? And it's not a check the box that I can say my council office went in Montbello and we checked the box and we talked to 6 people, but we are actually working in partnership with community, and what we're coming up with benefits and serves each of you.
Okay. Towards the end of the program, we're going to open up the floor to the people who are in attendance here, where you can ask them questions.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So what do you think, Brad?
Yeah. So I've talked about this a lot. I really want to make sure I want to have a community cabinet that's full of folks from across the district that are helping us think through and surface ideas and issues that come up, and then also come up with policy ideas. I would love to have, and I would take great pride in, if a lot of the policy ideas we get passed on city council come from the community. And that's something I've done in my career, working for a state senator who had a community office in Park Hill. And I ran that process, so I've seen it work in action before. So I'm really excited to have that. But I think beyond that, a couple other things is I want to make sure I'm regularly accessible. So to me, that means not only just the basics of attending and talking and listening at R&O meetings, but also making sure that you're doing coffees in the community. And then also another thing I want to do is make sure our office once a quarter is volunteering at a different nonprofit in every part of the district, and invite the community to come along and do service with us. And hopefully that sparks some conversations and ideas about things we could be doing at the city council level and in our city.
Okay.
Might I provide a rebuttal for that one?
Yes, you may.
Thank you so much. So what I found is I think the community cabinet is a thoughtful idea, but in terms of execution and what policies you actually get out of that is when you are changing, when the issues are changing, so should the people, right? You don't want a community cabinet that's stagnant, because you want folks to be coming to those issues that are experts, community experts, professional experts, whatever that expertise looks like. But when you build a community cabinet, those individuals never change over potentially 4 years, 12 years, depending on how many times you get reelected. And I think that actually does the opposite of what you're trying to achieve, which is create policy that is representative of community. But when you have this community cabinet, it no longer becomes representative of community because you have the same folks talking about the same issues. What actually works is building coalitions in communities and knowing which coalitions you tap into when there are issues around food justice, when there are issues about climate justice, transportation, housing. That's how you do that from that lens. And it's a much more effective approach for the desired outcome.
You sound like an organizer.
That's right.
I would like to say, community cabinets don't always operate in the way that you said, but we've had community cabinets in Montbello, and they've been very effective and efficient. They meet and they talk about the issues. They would bring in experts on the topics that were being talked about. Community were able to share and voice their opinions. So we have had some very strong community cabinets in Montbello. And that goes back to the issue of Montbello being made whole because there are 2 districts in Montbello.
Sure.
So again, getting back to that, I think a community cabinet would be a great idea in order to bring Montbello together as a whole, with Council District 8 representative and 11, working together in a group of residents in the community, hearing their issues and concerns. So it depends on how it is set up, how it is operated, and it can be very, very effective.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to help you, where the opportunity is, I think, is in building coalitions so that you are coming up with policies that are beneficial. And so I think what you were saying, Ms. Ann, and what I'm saying is we actually agree with, we are actually in agreement that the issues and the people need to change as the time progresses. And I also agree that when you talk about Montbello being made whole, and I have to talk about Park Hill as well, because Montbello and Park Hill were both split. I think there's an opportunity to build those coalitions with District 11 and with District 9.
Hello.
I forgot to say something earlier. Go Nuggets! I want to dovetail on the conversation about the different communities. I'd like to get a pledge from whoever wins this election that you will work with the District 11 councilperson. If it
Yes.
happens to overlap with a community that is in between two different districts, you must work with one another. Prior to making a decision, how does that impact those folks who are in that district and vice versa?
Yeah.
So can I get a commitment from you right now that that's something you will do?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes to both District 11 and to District 9 as well. As I said earlier, both of those communities were split, and I have a very strong relationship with the current sitting councilwoman in District 11, and so I have no qualms about that.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Well,
I don't even know how to put this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I was listening to the both of you guys, getting a lot of information and/or et cetera, but I think I speak for some of the community, the bickering back and forth, the this and that. Me personally, I'm not going to vote for anybody because I feel sorry for them. I'm going to vote for the person that represents my issues. That's all I got to say. And I was ashamed of you guys with that bickering back and forth stuff. Sorry.
Well,
all right. Hi. I don't talk much usually, but I think that something that I've noticed, I haven't been to a single debate. I really couldn't care less for politics, honestly. But something that I've noticed just from today is the big talk about humanity, but the lack of humanity from honestly everybody in the room today. I think it's kind of hard for us to talk about communities when we haven't all come together right now in this space. When we're talking about displacement, yet we are addressing somebody's legal issues that they had in the past. I think that that's something that we have, that's something that leads to displacement. So yes, that is something that's going to get addressed. 1, 2, it's hard to come together when there are people here who are asking questions with harsh tones. So I just want to very much agree with you that nobody wants to have bickering from these two, but also we shouldn't have bickering towards these two, because at the end of the day, they're only looking out for like our best interests. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, but also I think we should also address ourselves and our tones while addressing them as well. So I hope you all have a blessed, beautiful day with that one.
And I'll do a better job at monitoring the mic. Just as a quick reminder, this is not the Q&A section yet. We will get to that. My apologies. But thank you all for coming and sharing your voice. As we said, this forum is yours.
Hi, I'm Megan Tortorelli, and tonight I'm representing the East Colfax Neighborhood Association. I'm going to start by just thanking you both for running. I know you both have young children, and it's a lot of work.
Yes.
And it just like from all of us, like we really do appreciate everything that you've put into this, because it's hard. It's hard to miss bedtime. It's hard to miss getting kids ready for school. And so thank you. Thank you both. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and talk about I have a question about schools. How would you support schools that are on the verge of failing and yet can't get enough funding because of decreasing enrollment numbers? And how do these schools compete with others who can afford the extras, such as paras, special teachers, et cetera, when school funding is based on the number of students? This goes for all schools that are struggling, but being from the East Colfax neighborhood, Ashley is a good example of a school that's struggling, and right across the street are the Central Park schools that are not struggling, and that are raising hundreds of thousands of dollars through their PTAs every year.
Mm-hmm.
And Ashley, I think the last year I asked, I think they raised $5,000.
Sure.
And how would you see City Council's role be in supporting those schools?
So I think what is, I think, getting re-implemented now is sort of regular meetings between city council and Denver Public Schools. And I think that's a really important topic to sort of bring up and talk about, because you're right. There's a huge imbalance of what the money raised with PTAs and everything like that. And I just think that's a topic to bring up. And then also just making sure that as your representative, to make sure to know what those needs are. And then if it's something that the city currently does or could do, like just making sure that we know that, so that it's possible to advocate for it.
Yeah. So while the city council doesn't have any jurisdiction over Denver Public Schools, I do believe that when we talk about student-based budgeting, I think there's just a flaw in how schools are funded, right? If you are expected to be able to run schools based on the numbers, but you also don't have boundaries, and boundaries are drawn really unfairly, that creates and perpetuates that problem. And so I would say there's an opportunity for us to work in partnership with DPS electeds who do have that authority to influence folks to make better decisions for our schools and our community. I also recently city council revived their partnership with the city and county and with Denver Public Schools. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing, is to get out of the silos and to come together to figure out how do we best serve our students and our families within our cities, particularly understanding that there are things that when we talk about property tax and when we talk about increase in housing, there are things that we are doing within our city in terms of affordability that's causing those numbers to decline, because families can no longer afford to stay in our cities, and we're suburbanizing poverty in many ways. And so I think not just about education, but like, what are those connections to education that's creating those small schools and those small budgets that principals or administrators are reliant on, and how might we be able to combat some of those things from a city lens?
So would you support a liaison
You said a Liz?
with DPS
Oh, yeah.
and city council? I understand that there is the opportunity to do that, just that DPS opted not to do it. But given what's going on with school violence, crime, schools that are in danger of being closed, which impacts neighborhoods, would you be supportive of a liaison program with DPS?
Like like an individual who is paid to kind of
someone on staff.
Okay.
With DPS meeting with city council.
Yeah. I would say yes, and I also want to be in those meetings. I don't necessarily trust secondhand information, if I'm being honest with you, Lamone. But I think if it solves a problem that community has identified, then absolutely yes. And also, I have to be a part of those conversations as well.
Most definitely. How about you, Brad?
Yes, and my hope is that it can also strengthen connections with the Office of Children's Affairs and all the things they do around sort of the supports outside of school hours and school buildings.
Okay.
Okay, as you being a representative, you in the District 8 council position. As you know, we have council persons at large. Would you be willing to advocate for those one of those council individuals at large to take on this role? Because currently, actually, I don't believe we need council persons at large.
Yeah.
I truly don't believe we do. They do more harm than I think it's more of a shelter or a holder for city council when they have issues they don't want to deal with. And so then for the backup, your council at large individuals are those people. So, let them work, let them become some of those liaisons with Denver Public Schools and work in that capacity.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to support that?
Yeah, I could see
Became
the
a city
benefit.
council?
Absolutely. I can see the benefit of smaller districts, right? That you instead of having 11 and 2 at large, that you then have 13 and they represent, instead of the 65,000 folks, that it's a smaller number. I could definitely see the benefits of that as well. So yes, Ms. Ann.
Well, and I just think as part of their general focus, if they are going to be citywide, is they need to see sort of the interconnectedness of all these issues around housing and economic development and our schools and all those things. As to whether or not that should be an official duty, like I'm happy to, sort of explore and think about what could be done in that capacity. Certainly support exploring it.
Most definitely. What do you think about the idea of each neighborhood having their own city council rep?
That sounds chaotic.
That's what, 68 neighborhoods?
78 city council people?
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Be like
I don't think you
Congress.
get anything done.
Well, that's where your power of negotiation skills come in.
That's a lot of negotiation with 68 people.
All right. Are there any questions from the audience before I move on? Okay.
Anyway, sorry, I came late. Sorry about that. So first of all, good luck, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm worried mostly about refugees. United States, there's a lot of refugees, but I don't know, but not enough food, even for not enough food, even for other peoples too. But refugees are for how long time? For how many years? It's a long time, I think. So better to go to school, better to go to work. How do you think about this? Again, no jobs this time. It is most of it's pay station. Even if you go $3, just they use the pay station. How they hire employees? Nothing. We don't have not enough opening anywhere. Again, no safety, especially in the school.
Mm-hmm.
Our children's, our young generations, sometimes they like to stay at home. They don't want to go to school. What do you think about this? Again, this is about drugs. Young generations, they are rolling in the drugs. So how do you explain for the government, I don't know, just to controlling how they said, I'm worried about young generations, especially. So other thing is, I don't know, about the housing rent. Just now it is very expensive. I live by myself. I have 1 bedroom. I pay 1,000 something like that. But every year they add $50, $70 something. So how do you looking that?
Yeah.
So anyway, just good luck for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say thank you so much for that question. I think when we talk about food, work, safety, drugs, housing, what works for immigrant and refugees is what works for everybody, right? Like we're asking for the same thing when it comes to affordability, when it comes to accessible transportation that's affordable, when it comes to healthy and nutritious food, when it comes to being safe in our communities with our families. And so I would say like the advocacy for immigrant and refugees from my lens is no different than I think what other communities are asking in terms of long-term sustainability. And so investing in those programs so that we are investing in individuals and they have the access to the resources that they need to live healthy lives.
Yeah, thank you for my understanding. This
Yeah,
is my
sure.
second language.
No, you did a great job. Thank you.
Well, and thank you too. I think what I would just say to add to that is I think everybody should have the opportunity to live in safe and affordable neighborhoods, and that we should be, as you mentioned earlier, just investing in our youth. For me, having a background in youth workforce development, I just know that when we provide opportunity for our youth where they feel like they're invested in, cared for, and there's real sort of opportunity and hope for their future, a lot of the things that you talk about with our youth, I think those things go away. So in general, I want to say thank you for sharing your questions and your experience. I really appreciate that. And thank you for wishing us good luck too. But in general, I think these are the kinds of challenges and work that we need to do here in District 8.
Okay, so now we're going to go on to the lightning round of questions, yes or no. If your response is yes, raise your hand. If it's no, leave your hand down.
Okay.
And Ann White is going to direct that section.
Okay.
Alrighty. Are you ready?
As ready as they'll ever be.
Will you try to address changing the city charter to align Montbello and other? Sorry. Will you try to address changing the city charter to align Montbello and other bisected communities into one district?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Will you be a strong advocate? Would you be a strong advocate and champion city investment in community land trusts and other innovative affordable housing models identified by our communities?
Yes.
Okay, will you pledge to work closely with other district councilors in Montbello on issues that impact bisected communities? Okay, will you actively engage in and empower local communities to develop their own solutions to transit challenges?
Yeah.
Do you support giving communities the authority and resources to implement their own infrastructure improvements, allowing them to address their specific needs? Will you support tenant unions who organize for renters' rights and support policy to strengthen protections for tenants?
Yeah.
Will you support the creation and continuation of a long-term rental assistance program for the city?
Mhm.
Will you vote in favor of rent control policies to stabilize rents and address Denver's cost of living crisis? Will you ensure the funding for Rise Denver is spent appropriately for sidewalks in East Colfax and get a timeline committed to install these sidewalks? What specific measures or programs do you propose to support and enhance tech literacy among older adults in our community? How do you plan to ensure that they have the access to the necessary resources and training, effectively navigate and utilize technology, thereby promoting their inclusion and participation in the digital age? You meant to answer.
Okay. So one of the opportunities I think that we have, one of many, is we underutilize our recreation centers. And so when we talk about access to tech, that could be partnerships with our Denver public schools, that can be partnerships with our higher institutions to be able to provide those resources to individuals who want to get more savvy when it comes to tech. And we can do that in our buildings that we currently have. We could also partner with our community-based organizations who might be serving this demographic of folks to be able to provide them with funding so that you can then provide those resources to individuals who are interested in getting more savvy with tech as well. And that's probably a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I see a really strong potential for Denver Public Libraries to be involved in this work. And then I think you could partner with, community organizations, students, schools. I think there could be some great community building to help build up tech literacy. And then I would also want to see if we could build up some more partnerships with the state. which actually has programs and offices that are dedicated to making sure, not only does everybody have broadband, but they have tech literacy and devices too to access things. So.
Okay, I have a question. Montbello, I'm going to use it as an example. Montbello, we were not built for some of the challenges that we have in our community. Lack of space. The library, we know they have a program there, but it's not sufficient to handle our older adults and seniors for their program. The rec centers are not the place that we were told for those programs. Okay, we have the Airy Taylor building. Denver Police Department is soon going to be moving into the 911 building. There is over 10,000 square foot of space that's going to be vacant there. Would you advocate for a program such as what we're talking about for tech literacy, the digital age for seniors, to have a space in that space down there once it's vacated by DPD? I've been checking into it, and as I said, there could be meeting rooms there and everything, just because of Montbello and the limited space that we have to offer these programs. So would that be something that you would be willing to advocate for?
Yeah, I'd advocate for a comprehensive approach to what that building space could look like to benefit the community as a whole. So not just the tech, but I wonder, Ms. Ann, like, are there other programs could co-share that space that could be beneficial? And so I've heard like food banks we've talked about the farms, like, is there an opportunity to partner? Are there community-based organizations that might need space that could be in that space as well? So I would advocate for a comprehensive approach to like, let's assess what the community needs and let's respond to those needs by activating that space.
Okay, Brad?
Yes, I think, we don't have a lot of space left here in Denver, and especially in District 8. And I love the idea of repurposing space for uses that are beneficial to the community. I also think, in addition to what else has been said, like there could be, some sort of workforce or tech literacy around sort of training and experiential learning for young people too, around tech. So I like that idea too.
And the building currently has a workforce center in it.
Mhm.
It has the state license in it. It has the CD driver's license, programs in it.
council office.
And they also have Denver Human Services is in that building.
Yes, ma'am.
So too, and that's why I targeted that, to look at the space that's down there, and all of those programs could be, but for seniors, and I'm specifically stating this, we learn differently than the young people do. We need our space. We need to have someone that is going to be able to help us learn and understand technology.
Absolutely.
So that is going to be a specialized program for tech literacy that I'm talking about.
Okay, is there any questions from the audience about what we just discussed?
We have 3.
Okay, make your way to the microphones, please.
Thank you.
Here I am again. As a council person, would you champion different city departments to work with one another on a common goal? In other words, not allow them to say, hey, I don't have anything to do with that, or no, I don't have anything to do with that, but when it's obvious that they could collaborate for the benefit of the people of this city.
Yes. And, one thing I think that the city could utilize better is there's a lot of times where things like opening up a restaurant, you got to talk to 5 or 6 different departments or agencies. And a lot of times they give you sometimes conflicting advice or sometimes just outright, opposite answers. And so one thing I would like to see us use more is Denver has something called Peak Academy, which trains city employees on process improvement and innovative ways of collaborating, working together, and really to shorten timeframes for things. So Larry, I'm wholeheartedly in support of that. And I think there's obviously probably some, collaborations that could be happening that aren't happening too. So yes.
The answer is yes. And my plan for city council, once I'm elected, is to go and have conversations with those individual departments to understand what's working within those departments. Are they well resourced? Do they have the money and the people that they need? What are the challenges that might be happening in those departments as well, as an opportunity to us to really break down the silos, right? And so that we're coming together and solving issues collectively. And I think sometimes we may not know like what one hand of the city is doing. And so this is an opportunity to really understand, like, is there alignment, and we're not pushing folks off to like, hey, go talk to them, hey, go talk to them, but we have a true understanding of what's happening within those departments.
I actually had a question, but I want to follow up on this particular one. Would you be in favor of getting small business advocacy or advocates working out of the city that actually help small businesses work through the processes? Because the silos are there, and the small business owner has to go to one office for one thing and another office for another. It's easy for the offices to play each other apart, play on each other. We need advocacy for small businesses.
Yeah.
Okay. My real question is, as you can see that there's a turnout here, and I thank everybody for coming out tonight to support the forum. The city residents voted to pass where money is collected and given back to campaigns to help equalize the money issue on campaigns. I think it was a great thing to do. However, given tonight's forum, sitting in Montbello, which is in a rich community, and I don't mean rich in dollars, but rich in diversity, rich in the community awareness, rich in what we believe in our beautiful community, and our residents are not really here tonight. And so I wonder how many times they don't know something is happening. And we use all electronic means today. Everybody's using electronic means to get the message out. And I applaud all the organizations here because we have mailing lists. We use that. I think you should advocate on behalf of all of the residents of the city of Denver that some of those funds should be put into a fund to leaflet, drop lit on neighborhoods around where forums are going to be held to encourage those local residents to come out to the forums to hear the candidates and not have to listen to sound bites or literature which do not tell the whole story. Would you be supportive?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will tell you from my work at RTD, when the University of Colorado 8 line was opening up, that's exactly what we did. We went to bus stops and we delivered information to let them know that their bus routes were changing. And here were the 4 areas that you can go to be able to get that information. It was in Park Hill, it was in Montbello, it was in GES as well. And so 100%, like we should be innovative, and maybe not that's probably not innovative like going to drop lit, but being innovative in how we are going to connect with our communities, right? Whether that's getting on a bus, whether that's walking down a street, whether that's whatever that could look like. 100% agree.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? Specifically, a question about Quebec. I know this isn't quite Montbello territory, but I know it's been going on for 50 plus years and 5 environmental studies. I'm kind of curious what you guys are going to want to do to help the public be safe so that, kids can get to school safely and not have to worry about traffic.
I mean, at minimum, which we talk about Quebec is, and a lot of that road from Colfax north don't have sidewalks. And so at minimum, we should be invested in infrastructure on that street to make sure that folks feel safe, whether you're taking your students to school or getting to work, to be able to travel down those streets. Particularly where it's important is in the winter time when the snow is shoveled up and you literally are having to walk in the streets. And so you think about someone with a mobility device, it's really difficult to be able to travel down Quebec when there aren't sidewalks. And so I'd say at minimum, the investment should be in sidewalks on Quebec, like real sidewalks, not where that park is, where the sidewalk is this big, but actual sidewalks.
Quebec is one of those streets where if you're walking, biking, rolling, or even driving, you kind of do one of these every time you cross it because it's not safe. So I think, it's making sure that, the new sidewalk fund, is sort of, and I know there's already city funds working towards building sidewalks there, but just making sure it's complete so that when people are walking to school and kids are walking to school, they are safe and they are separated from traffic. It brings up the broader point of the Department of Transportation Infrastructure has a bucket of money called Safe Routes to School. I would like to see, if possible, to increase the funding for that so they can increase more projects where it is easy to get to school for kids to walk and bike. Because right now, for the most part, kids get to school being driven in a car. So I would love to see us be more active, safer, and have better things for kids to walk to school.
Could you like the second part to that?
Sure.
Specifically parks, like Verbena Park. I know for like several years it's been, I don't want to say neglected, but it's like one of the baddest parks, I believe, in the city. And I know there's been several Zoom meetings that we've had neighbors come on and suggest what we want, and it's been turned down. What are your guys' intentions on making sure that the parks are not only safe for kids, but like updated and, safe for everybody?
Yeah, I think that design should be the decision of community, and that we should, as city council, be co-creating what the vision for those parks look like based on the communities that are in that are near those parks currently. And we have the funds from the city lens to be able to make those investments in our parks that can actualize what those visions look like from communities' lens.
I would just add that, I think lighting is really important. And the city has, through a couple of different departments, I think funds to improve lighting in parks and other parts of the city. So I just think in general, lighting is really important to make our parks safe. And again, I think also when parks are such a vibrant part of communities, like you want to make sure that, instead of a bureaucrat somewhere inside the city sort of designing and thinking about what a park should look like, we really need to make sure before plans come to fruition that we're actually involving neighborhood feedback about what they would like to see.
Are we in the Q&A section?
Yeah, I got a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to whatever.
Because we have a lot
like 15
online.
minutes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I didn't hear much about the bus rapid transit that's being planned for East Colfax. Do you know what the status of that is, Chantel?
You can ask me specifically, Lamont?
Yeah.
All right. So in the conversations that I've had thus far is that we're about $10 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but in comparison to the full scope of the program is actually not a money, $10 million short of being able to actualize that project. And so I would imagine that both of us would have some responsibility to figure out where that other $10 million is going to come from, if it's important for us on our platforms.
Okay. So I have a suggestion.
Okay.
If and when the construction starts, there's going to be disruption to the businesses up and down Colfax.
Mhm.
Will there be a fund to assist those business owners, like business interruption money, to support them while the area is being redeveloped for the rapid transit?
Let's explore it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You remember what happened with Welton Street?
Yes, ma'am.
When they put in the light rail, a lot of those businesses
Gemini.
were disrupted and never came back. We don't want to see that happen on Colfax.
Yeah, I really love Gemini, the sandwich shop that was on Welton and before it came. We get a
Right.
real good sandwich.
Right.
That's gone.
Now, the second question I have is about
Lamont, sorry. I know Brad was getting ready to also respond.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, DITO has sort of these construction interruption grants for businesses. And, my expectation would be that those would continue for BRT. And then I also just think for the District 8 representative, I think what else would be really important is to make sure we're championing and publicizing those businesses during interruptions so that anything we can do to drive additional customer support there, we can do that too.
Oh, that sounds good. The other question I have is about tree planting. Northeast Park Hill has been touted as having the least amount of trees per capita. Last summer, the city planted, I believe, 2,000 trees, and not a single one of them was earmarked for Northeast Park Hill. So how do we prevent that in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that process was, but we prioritize communities that, when you think about tree canopies that are lacking in those areas, quite frankly, again, I don't know what the process is, but you prioritize those communities that don't have that.
Right.
Yeah. And I know a little bit about this because I just recently participated in the Be a Smart Ash program where they replace your ash that sort of dies with a new one. And I think they had some sort of prioritization framework for communities. So, if that's not happening in this other program, which I'm unfamiliar with, that of course should be something that should be spoken up and advocated for.
Which you have to remember that program is an individual request, right? So that's specifically for people who own their properties to be able to request to put a tree in their yard. But it sounds like you were asking more expansively about like what it looks like to impact the tree canopy in a neighborhood versus on an individual basis.
Correct, because I didn't hear anything about the opportunity to request a tree until after it was over.
Yeah, yeah.
So another role of city council is a conduit for information.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, for real. Let me see. The other issue are sidewalks. So I live in an older section of Park Hill where we have 60-year-old, 70-year-old trees that are super tall, but they're also tearing up the sidewalks and cracking the pavement in the streets. So what type of advocacy could you offer to remedy those sidewalks and potentially tree removal? There's a forest department, I've talked to them already. They're not offering up any information.
Can you say that again? You said that they're ripping up the sidewalks.
The trees are the older trees.
The roots,
the tree. Okay.
The roots are just cracking the sidewalks, and then you could see cracks going across the streets. I don't know if that means the trees are getting ready to uproot, but you see a bunch of them in the older section of Park Hill.
I don't know if that's like an urbanist question or a city question, if it's an infrastructure question. I'd have to look into that one, Lamone.
I know, because the forestry department is not offering up any good information, although they would be the ones to remove the trees.
Well, one thing that might be interesting is right now, the Department of Transportation Infrastructure is standing up an advisory committee for how they're going to implement this sidewalk program. There should probably be someone from forestry on that committee and try to figure, because that's obviously they got to anticipate that happening.
Oh yeah.
We're not talking about we're talking about sidewalks that are in existence.
Existing sidewalks.
Yeah.
Like where I live, the trees are technically on the parkway, but there's a sidewalk and then there's grass and then there's a street.
Sure.
And the trees are on the parkway.
Yeah.
Which is city owned. But the city's not taking care of their property.
Okay.
And I don't want to pay for it.
I hear you. As a homeowner.
Okay. Did you say you had questions?
Yeah, so we have been broadcasting the event live on Facebook, and we have some online viewer questions. We also have folks in the audience who are queued up to ask questions. So if it's okay, we'll move on to that section.
Yeah, we're ready.
Perfect. And so the following questions come from Paris LaShawn. And the first two, I'm going to ask them as a yes and no question. And then the other two, I'll ask for a response just because I know we have a queue and we're nearing the end of the event. So apologies to Paris LaShawn for speeding these up. But the first two yes or no questions, just raise your hand. Do you support cash reparations for foundational Black Americans? Would you support repealing the urban camping ban? Cool. Okay, these are the longer questions, and I'm sorry I don't have enough context for the first one, but what will you do to help the seniors at the Dahlia Square Senior Apartments? The current councilman didn't do anything to address their needs. There was another question that also included the Fusion Studios, and I apologize, I have no other contextual information.
I actually do. So I think, so there are a lot of changes that are happening within that facility. And I think having conversations, well, one, understanding who is responsible for that building, but having conversations with the individual residents within there to figure out where are the opportunities for advocacy. My understanding, and it's probably not untrue for many of you, is that the folks in those buildings in those buildings have been ignored. And I'm very familiar with Fusion Studios because I was a VP at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and that's one of our buildings. And what I know is that we often house folks and then we leave them there and we don't have conversations about what they actually need. And so what you need is a council person who is willing to go into those housing developments and have those conversations with individuals to figure out how we might be better able to advocate for their needs and to push back against these owners who actually aren't taking care of the units in the way in which they say they would.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to. So actually, this similar situation sort of happened right before the last round of the election, where I had some tenants at a building in East Colfax that invited me to come over and hear what was going on inside their building. I'm not an expert by any means, but I was able to connect them actually to EC3 and some other sort of opportunities that for some of the issues they were facing. So I think first and foremost, what I would like to do is just meet with them, bring my staff, understand kind of what's going on, and then what city services or help could be provided.
Perfect. And then the next question comes from Congress Park United for Sustainable and Inclusive Neighborhoods. The question is, do you support subpoena powers for the city auditor?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That's something I don't know quite a bit about, so I'd want to research it and understand it a little bit more before answering.
Do you support subpoena powers for the auditor, the city auditor?
Okay. Hi, I think if there's something from this forum that I really gained today is that living in Denver is very expensive. We've talked about increasing property taxes. We've talked about community land trusts and the need for them. We've talked about emergency rental assistance, but yet there's not consensus about rent stabilization. And so I just wanted to name that. My specific questions about the rental registry. The rental registry was created as a way to have landlords be able to register their respective apartments, and within those apartments, they're having inspections completed. The problem is just cause evictions failed in the state legislature, and so that was the one opportunity where landlords would have to, in some way, notify people why they would serve them with a notice to quit, and subsequently would also be required to provide them some sort of relocation expenses. There's nothing around the rental registry around those sense of protections. So if a property fails, the inspections is a repeated failure, it's not clear what's going to happen next. And the people that have been residing there for some time will end up being displaced. And most of those buildings are buildings where people that have low income backgrounds live, and they don't have the opportunity to go to another place. So my question to you all is, what will you do to support the creation of a fund and a process to really hold landlords accountable in the case that people do end up having to leave their homes in order for them to be able to find another viable option and not just be sent to homelessness?
Yeah. I think about a few things when it comes to this. I think we should be tracking what is causing folks to be evicted, whether that's from a financial standpoint or behavioral standpoint. I think that's one of the opportunities. When we talk about a rental registry, I think the opposite of that should also be true for our tenants, where you could actually give your owner, your landlord, a grade. And the city has a criteria in which we are evaluating if they are, if owners are actually adhering to that criteria. So like, do you have a working toilet? You know, how responsive is this individual when you have concerns within your unit? Finally, I've talked about tracking the social determinants of health. And I think when you're able to track those social determinants of health, that could feed into the score that the landlord is receiving, right? So you think about like restaurants, you'll see an A or an F on that. And so like grades, essentially. Thank you. I didn't even realize she was right there. So you can track it in that way. And so it's accountability on both sides, right?
Thank you for this question. I was actually, there was an article about the rental registry today in a newspaper, and they mentioned this, right, where there's sort of this sort of gray space of what happens when, the city inspects and says that this is uninhabitable, and figuring out what to do with the person who needs a place to be, right? So what I think would be interesting is to figure out how can you work with the different city agencies involved, whether it's public health, host, and others, to figure out how can you collaborate with maybe some rapid rehousing resources and emergency temporary rental assistance, and figure out how do you get a process where when those situations do happen, it's incumbent upon both the city and the landlord to figure out how do you place that person in a home while that situation is happening.
I totally hear that, but none of that is happening in the city. Resources are tapped. There's absolutely no options for people. And there's a lot of people that we work with that are on the brink of homelessness. So would you be willing to explore the opportunity to create a fund that is specific to helping people with relocation? Or would you be willing to pass some specific follow-ups to the rental registry that would hold landlords accountable, because they know that their tenants are living in deplorable conditions? They should be responsible for helping them rehouse.
Yes, and an opportunity to incentivize to keep folks housed. When you talk about, so we've talked a bunch about seniors, right? It's really difficult to rehouse seniors as well. And so, yes, absolutely so. And also where we can explore incentivizing folks to keep individuals in those affordable housing units.
Yeah, well, and I think I'd be happy to explore that, because I think also what's important to know too is for the city to serve people experiencing homelessness, that cost estimate for what it costs is somewhere between $42,000 to $104,000 a year. So it's certainly cheaper to figure out and create a fund and figure out how to keep people housed in those situations. So I'd certainly be open to exploring it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm kind of nervous right now. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As a young youth living in the community of Montbello, I would like to know you guys' safety plans for the young youth. We had a lot of violence this year. A lot of my fellow seniors didn't graduate with me because of the violence here in the community of Montbello, and I would like to know your safety plan for this community and the other communities that you're going to serve.
Yeah. So this topic is actually near and dear to my heart because last Thursday I lost my cousin, my youngest cousin, to gang violence, or one of my younger cousins to gang violence. And what I know from being in this community is that when you provide opportunities for engagement, pro-social activities, whether that be employment, apprenticeships, internships, jobs even for the adults in our communities, recreational activities, partnering with educational institutions to provide those opportunities. As an educator, what I found with my students is my tagline, and everyone knew in the building, I'd say, show them everything. And so I would constantly take them on field trips that you wouldn't even think about, right? Like going to give out Thanksgiving baskets or wrapping presents for kids that are in foster care. And I think that's what we should be looking at, is like, how are we creating these community safety hubs? We're investing in the individuals within our community, our youth more specifically, providing them opportunities so that they are not in these activities that aren't providing them positive outcomes, but are instead utilizing their time for positive outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And you shouldn't be nervous. You did great. But this is near and dear to me too. I have a 4-year-old that's in daycare, and a couple months ago, she had to go through her first shelter-in-place drill, which is never something you want to hear from daycare. But also, on Saturday, I was over at the Denver Broncos Boys and Girls Club for the March for Peace, and it was just wonderful to see so many youth in Montbello making a difference and thinking about advocating for what they need. And so for me, and District 8 and being on City Council, is I think we need to make sure we're partnering with DPS to give the supports they need to keep kids safe. Second is make sure we're really providing opportunities. So I helped create Denver's youth apprenticeship system. So I think providing kids opportunities to explore college and career opportunities, making sure after school activities are something that are readily accessible across the city are really important. No, thank you. And I just think in general, we need to make sure youth feel safe, supported, and hopeful for their future.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. And a follow-up question is, me as a senior that just graduated like 20 minutes ago. I
went to East?
No, thank you. No, that was what I was gonna say. I didn't have the chance to graduate from the high school that I was supposed to. That was Montbello High School, because I wasn't even feeling safe or around the school or in my community, and I know I didn't get the same opportunities as I got at the school I got. I went to CEC Early College. That's at Federal and Elliott. So I dropped 45 minutes every day to go to high school. So I would like to see more concurrent enrollment. I know a lot of my fellow high school students that went to Montbello High School didn't have concurrent enrollment, didn't have as you say, apprenticeships, internships. I would like to see more of the counselors coming into classes to talk about what you guys do and make students engage in politics or make them engage in the community service we do. Because I think from the last candidates, there was a lack of that. Nobody knew who they were or like what they were doing because they never went with the youth community. They never went to go talk to them, especially the Latino community. We're 55% Latinos in this community, and we are not represented as we should. So I would like to know how you guys gonna reach out to the Latino community and how you guys gonna combine all of the cultures together.
Yeah. I love that question. I think there's opportunities for us to be communal. When you talk about reaching out to the Latino community, the Latino community is my community, right? I don't feel any differently about the Black community than I do about the Latino community. And so going into the spaces in which Latino communities gather, right? And learning the issues that are important to those communities, but also having spaces in which we can all be communal as a community, right? Montbello has a lot of like community events over the summer. It's like one of my favorite things to do. But like the council office could also be not only responsible for sponsoring some of the folks who are already putting on some of those events, but hosting some of those events as well, and bringing those communities together. And so I would love the opportunity to do that. I started working with youth. I'm a founder of Project Voice, which was specifically for youth that are in school to get them into politics and policy, to better advocate. And so I am experiencing that way, and I love the opportunity to expand that from a city council lens.
Yeah, I think it comes down to just showing up and partnering and being in the community and listening. And one thing I'm looking forward to is after getting elected is just doing just that. So I really look forward to partnering and showing up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wish you guys luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations again.
Congrats.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi primera pregunta es para la señorita. Me gustaría saber, porque siempre que se está expresando solamente a las personas de color. Yo en esta sala tengo ahorita personas invitadas latinas de Nicaragua, yo soy de Honduras, Salvador y México. Entonces estoy escuchando que siempre estás hablando dirigida a las personas de color. ¿Qué oportunidad o qué contamos nosotros aquí?
Okay, so what she was asking was that she hears a lot from you talking about the Black, like the people of color, and she is Latin, and she is coming here from, dijo Nicaragua? From Nicaragua, Salvador, and she's from Honduras. And she even invited some people from the Latin community here today. And she's wondering what you specifically are going to do to involve the Latin community rather than just speaking on the colored individuals.
So when I talk about folks of color, that's inclusive of the Latin community. I don't separate those. It's the collective of folks, no matter where you're from, to bring communities together. It's not about Black folks or Latino folks. Like, it's about the collective of us and understanding who lives in our community. And so when I talk about coalition building, it's not coalition building with one community. It's coalition building with all communities, because that's important to me.
And what I would just add to that is it's about showing up. It's about, making sure that we're talking. There's always more perspectives, more communities, just more areas where our city council office can be deepened. And so I look forward to really doing a robust community engagement that celebrates the diversity of District 8.
También tengo una pregunta para el joven. Me gusta mucho que dice que quiere tener conexiones con las diferentes organizaciones de la comunidad. Pero también tengo una pregunta, ¿por qué sus flyers no están traducidos en español?
Yeah.
Okay. She says that I like a lot that you are talking about connections with different organizations, but I also want to know why your flyers aren't in Spanish.
Yeah. That's a good question, and there's no excuse. I apologize for not having them in Spanish. If when elected to City Council District 8, I want to make sure that our website, our resources, and everything are translated into multiple languages. So that's something that I'd like to fix when elected.
Okay.
So we're at 8 o'clock.
Miss Ann got her
Do we
purse.
have the flexibility to stay longer?
How will you help young community leaders, and also how will you convince young voters to vote for you?
That's a great question. So I'll just start with, I visited a couple of classrooms around the district as part of this campaign to kind of really talk about it. And I think it's really important that after you get elected is that you are visiting schools around the district and talking about the importance of civic engagement. And I know your mom, and I know she's going to make sure you're civically engaged. So I think that's really great. Another thing I would like to do, I don't want to make any commitments because I need to figure out if it's possible or not, but I would love to have, like an intern or an apprentice in my office during the course of my term, because I think that can also be a way to make sure we're focusing on youth issues and really boosting youth engagement in the District 8 office.
Hi, thank you for the question. So one of the things that Chris Herndon, that I will keep from Chris Herndon is this leadership program, because I've heard of the impacts from our community about the benefits of that. And so I'd like to see that to stay in existence. In addition to that, partnering with our community schools and our community organizations to provide those opportunities. And finally, when it comes to internships, I currently have a student that's in high school at Denver School of the Arts who is employed on my campaign. And so not only do I believe that for what it looks like when I'm elected, I'm showing that before I'm elected in my commitment to that and students like you. And to visit your school, if you invite me, I'd love to come.
Okay. I got a couple more questions of clarification for Brad. Well, actually, both of you, glad to hear that you support cash reparations, overdue. For Brad, I noticed there's a little hesitation about responding to the question about repealing the camping ban.
Mm-hmm.
And then also rent control.
There, for the rent control one, there wasn't any hesitation. I've been clear in the previous version of this forum too that I don't support it. Because from the research I've seen in other municipalities, it could actually harm the very people it intends to benefit.
No.
In that, what a lot of municipalities have done it is it actually causes people who are landlords and provide rental housing might decide to convert it into for sale, and we lose that housing stock. And it tends to decrease the amount of new housing that's being built as well.
Okay.
So it tends to chill the market.
Okay.
What the research has shown, and I looked at 182 municipalities, is that rent control works in the short term and rent stabilization works in the long term. And so there's an opportunity for the markets to respond and the owners to be able to respond to markets. So if you have it up or down, that's not true.
Okay.
It's shown to work for communities.
Okay. All right. And then the other, repealing the camping ban.
Yeah. So I think, what I think the camping ban in general doesn't work, but I do think, and I've heard this from small business owners, including some people in this room, is that when there's issues of public health or public safety, I think the city needs to be able to address that. But really what we should be focusing on is doubling down what's working. So things like safe outdoor spaces, building more permanent supportive housing to truly get people off the streets and connected to better services and housing.
Okay.
And if you're spending those dollars sweeping communities, you're not investing those dollars in those alternative methods. And so when you talk about the urban camp, like when you talk about enforcing that, you should be taking those dollars away from solutions that we know are actually not effective in addressing the thing that we are trying to address. And so you instead take those dollars invested in short-term housing, permanent supportive housing, wealth building opportunities for home ownership. Those are some of the things that you can do in real time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. You all run a very nice forum tonight.
Thank you, Lamont.
Um,
And thank you to all the organizations that put this on. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So for the audience, turn in your ballot before June 6th. If you're not registered to vote, you can register to vote online through the election committee. And for those of you with the interpretation devices, please return them to the interpretation table. And remember to sign out your children from the childcare room. You all have a good evening, okay?
Thank you for moderating. Great. I know. Many people like want
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right, Popeyes, huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Chicken nuggets.
Thank you. Let's do it on another whole thing.
Policy questions are always good. You know, on the street, like I was saying about grassroots, we feel the effects right away. Oh, yeah. Right. No local is the way to go. Yes, ma'am.